This
Okay.
conference will now be recorded.
All right. So firstly, any questions, guys? Anyone, any questions before I get started? And anything that I can take?
Sir, I have one
All
small
right.
doubt, sir.
So, good, please.
Sir, that what is, sir, invoke REST API is there, sir? What exactly mean?
You mean invoke a REST API call in PowerShell?
Yes, sir. Yes, not in, sir. In while
Mm-hmm.
the reading of key concepts of overview awareness and pipeline, I have read that point.
Okay. Let's see.
I have read this point. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
so I
Where is
didn't
it? Okay.
understand
So
what
pipeline.
exactly meaning of that.
Mhm. Where exactly mean? I'm sorry.
In the in the key concept overview is there in pipeline. Yeah, in the
Okay.
last in that
Okay.
points I have read something called invoking REST APIs.
Mhm.
Of
Okay. A task is a predefined. Yeah. I mean, invoking a REST API. REST API is nothing but a backend server of Azure. So it's just nothing but a task or a step which is going ahead and talking to Azure. That's what they mean by something called as REST API. So it's called invoke a REST API, which means in the backend, you are making use of something known as an application programming interface. This is again in the background, something that we are not, let's say, really using. So, for example, you want to run a PowerShell script, or you want to run a ARM template. All of these are nothing but invoking the REST API in the background. So, you're just talking to something called as a REST API, the REST service, and they are accepting your request and helping you, get the thing done. That's what it really means out here as such.
okay, sir. Thank you.
Yes, anyone? Any more questions, guys?
So
All
while
right,
doing
so let's get
YAML,
started. Okay, while doing YAML, good, please.
yeah, we'll be creating this. We'll be adding tasks now, sir. Publish,
Mm-hmm.
restore, and all. So
Mm-hmm.
below for the arguments, last class you showed that we have to copy paste from classic for the arguments. So apart
Mm-hmm.
from
Mm-hmm.
that, if we are not creating any classic, then how we have to do this, sir? From where we'll be getting arguments?
Again, arguments is completely something that depends upon the code that you're building up. So either your developer will tell you what kind of an argument you need, because these are all .NET arguments that we are looking at. So if you do a .NET restore, and I can do a .NET restore in my laptop. So I can say .NET restore hyphen hyphen configuration. I can say release hyphen hyphen output. Nothing but artifact staging directory. So these are all the arguments that are required by your code. So either you or the developer can help you with, let's say, these particular arguments out here as such. But since we are doing a classic, I just went ahead to get from the classic and put it out there as such. Does it answer your question?
Yes.
That means, sir,
Anyone else, guys? Any question?
while you are working from the scratch means we have to take the help from developers, right, sir? To
Yes,
get
you need to understand what kind of arguments that, yes, you need to understand what kind of arguments would the code really need out here. So you can take the help from your development team to understand how this is built out.
okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank
Okay. Anyone else, guys? Any more questions?
Sir, if you want to
Mhm.
enable the trigger in the YAML, you have to mention which branch you want to enable for which branch,
Yes, correct.
like developer branch.
Correct.
So the
Mhm.
trigger will be applied to all the stages, like the build.
The trigger will be applied to all the stages. All the stages, as in the build stage, will take the trigger. So the build stage here will take the trigger out here. So once the build stage, basically, this is the first stage, right? So this will take the trigger, and the rest of the stages will work depending upon the build. So the rest of the stages are chained depending upon the build out here. So if you look at your pipeline, this is how your pipeline really looks like. So it is all the stages that you mentioned, which depends upon the build. So build is the first stage which will get that trigger applied. After that, all these are continuous deployments.
So, but in the
Mhm.
classic pipeline, we have the separate triggers for the build and release stages, like CI/CD.
Yes, but in a YAML, you don't have a release. You don't have a traditional release out here. In a YAML, it is build and release combined together. It's a build plus release. So that's the reason you do not mention a continuous deployment trigger out here. It automatically takes it out.
If I want only the build stage, I just want to produce the artifacts and check the functionality.
Hmm.
So is it possible
Okay,
to so cancel the deployment to the development stage
of
after
course.
the
I
build?
mean, we can do that. So
We can do it
yes, we
manually,
can do
right?
that. I mean, that you can do it. So for example, if you run this pipeline and if you say, let's say, develop branch, you can say, okay, fine, I don't need this. Only run this out.
That will be fine. We have to do it manually.
It is manual, yes. I mean, when you say manually, when you run the pipeline, you at least have to run the pipeline once, right? So when you run the pipeline, you will have to mention what is the stage that you do not want to, let's say, have the release running. So you have to do this manually, yes.
So in the deployment stage, when you say download the public build artifacts, so it is
Yes.
asking like the current build and the specific build. What's the build version?
Mm-hmm.
When
Correct.
you click on the specific build, what are those?
Yes.
We choose the current build.
Well, yes, we chose the current build, which means that this is the build that I want you to go ahead and download the artifact. If you say any other build, which means you have another build pipeline, you want to download the artifact of that build pipeline, you can also do it in the YAML pipeline out here. So you can say other build and you can give the build ID there, and you can say what is the artifact that the build needs to, or that your pipeline needs to download.
So for build version, we have to choose
Sorry,
version. Build version.
latest version.
Which
You
version?
can take the latest. You can take the latest version of the build. You can say latest. So you can be doing the latest version for your build out here. So if I just scroll down, and this is the one that you're asking about, just download. And if you have specific files or specific artifacts out here or specific build out here, there is something called latest. So you can take the latest out here as such. Yes, any more questions, guys? Okay, one, two, and going. Let's see. All right, so today we will start our discussions with something called as terraforms. Again, a major topic. A lot of interview questions. You can expect a lot of interview questions, a lot of job profiles, and all that stuff that are asked on terraforms and all these things. So again, terraforms is just like sorry, terraform is just like ARM templates, which are used for infrastructure as a code. Infrastructure as a code, which means that you can store your infrastructure like a resource group or a storage account or a virtual machine or a web application. You can store all this particular information in the form of a Terraform code, just like we did an ARM template. You can store all these things in the form of a Terraform code, and you can deploy it into various environments like, let's say, development, let's say QA, let's say staging, let's say production. You can do this. Then the question a lot of people ask me, we already know ARM template, then why do we need to learn Terraforms? Where will Terraform really come into picture? Terraform is a multi-cloud tool. It's a multi-cloud platform tool, which means that Terraform can not only be used on Azure, it can also be used on AWS or GCP or on-premise environment, Salesforce, whatever it is. ARM templates are only specific to Azure. The other major difference is that ARM template is written in a language called what, guys? Which language is ARM template really written in?
JSON.
Which language do you need to know to
JSON.
write in? JSON,
JSON.
exactly.
JSON.
JSON. And JSON is a serialization syntax. Which, what does serialization really means is that it can be easily interpreted by the applications of Azure. So I have a server of Azure. Server of Azure can easily understand this particular syntax called JSON. You don't have to build JSON. You don't have to do anything with JSON. It's directly a machine language. which means it makes it very difficult for me as a human being to understand this. It's difficult to handle for a human eye. That's where Terraform comes into picture, and Terraform says, you know what? I don't use this JSON. I don't have to use JSON. I use a language called HCL, HashiCorp Configuration Language. HashiCorp is the company that built Terraforms. HashiCorp is, let's say, that company that has, let's say, built Terraforms, that has made Terraforms and all these things out. And it uses a language called HashiCorp Configuration Language, which is very easier than the ARM template, or very easier than, let's say, the template language what ARM uses. And also, using Terraforms, you can do a lot of modernization of infrastructure. Like you can save your Terraforms in the form of modules, you can reuse them. There's a lot of use case out here for Terraform out here. That's the reason a lot of companies today, if you see, are moving closer to Terraforms, and not, I mean, there's still ARM template is still being used. You still need to understand the JSON syntax, but Terraform is easier to use, better to adapt, and easier to also maintain, and more modern in nature. But unlike ARM template, see, not write an ARM template, what did I do? I just went ahead to my VS Code. I said, okay, fine. I went into something known as an extension here, and I searched for an extension called ARM. I installed this. It's an extension, that's it. And I started with this. Unlike this, Terraform is not a direct tool. You need to do some download and configuration. And what kind of a download and configuration do I mean out here? Firstly, you would initially start with a tool called Azure CLI, command line interface. This is something that you need to download and install. So let's do that. Again, in my case, I have Azure CLI, I have everything in my system. So I'm using a virtual machine in order to, let's say, get started with the same thing. So it's a brand new machine. So let's give it a second to boot up. And I'll just go ahead, use the internet directly on this machine. And the very first tool that I'll download is called Azure CLI. So I'll just say, I'll say start syncing, continue without this data, confirm and start browsing. Fine. Say download Azure CLI. It can be for Windows 10, 11, whatever it is. The very first link, this is a Microsoft link out here. So the very first link that I'm going here, I'll just scroll down. It's telling install Azure CLI on Windows. Azure CLI is the PowerShell version, which is supported on all the three platforms like Windows, Mac, and Linux. PowerShell ISC is only supported, it only runs on Windows, whereas CLI will run on all the three environments, making it more versatile and acceptable. And Terraform uses Azure CLI. Terraform needs Azure CLI to be installed. So I'll say install CLI, just scroll down, and it's telling, okay, latest version. I'll say yes, please download the latest release. And this will go ahead and download something known as a Azure CLI.msi file. I'll just say after download, open this file, and it will prepare for installation. I'll say install, and I'll let this go ahead and install, let's say, Azure CLI out here. So this is the very first configuration that I do to go ahead and install something known as an Azure CLI. And once this is done, the second thing that I go ahead and do is to download Terraform itself. The second thing is downloading Terraform. Again, Terraform is a product by a company called HashiCorp. So what I do is, once this is installed, I mean, while it's getting installed, I'll say download Terraform. So I'm just going to Google, saying download Terraform. Very first link, downloads Terraform by HashiCorp. It's telling, okay, fine, this is ready. Please go ahead and download this out. It's automatically identifying the operating system that you belong to. Again, this is available for Mac, Linux. You have OpenBSD, FreeBSD, Solaris, a lot of things out. And while we're we're talking, CLI is installed, say finish, and I'll just scroll down and I'll say this is a Windows binary and I am working on a 64-bit operating system. So I'll say AMD 64, this is where I'm working on. I'll click on this and I'll also download Terraforms. Again, if you download Terraform, right, all you're going to all you're going to get is something like a zip file. That's it. So if you see this, it's nothing but a zip file. Just copy the zip file, go to your C drive of your system or anywhere you wish. I'm just pasting it in the C drive, paste it here. I'll say extract all and I can delete the zip file. I don't need this anymore. And if you see, I have a folder right now called Terraforms 1.3.4 Windows AMD 64, inside which I just have something called as a Terraform application. That's it. I just have one simple thing called as a Terraform application. It's an exe file. I have downloaded it. That's it. Now you have to configure Windows or configure your system to understand Terraforms, understand the language of Terraforms. How do I do that? If I go back again, I'll firstly take the path where I have extracted my terraforms, where I have this particular terraform exe. I'll copy this out. Okay. As and when I copied this, I'll go into the search bar and I'll search for edit system environment variables. There is something called edit system environment variables. I'll go here and I'll say environment variables. These are all the languages what your system can understand. And for your system to understand Terraform, that path needs to be mentioned here. So I have something called path. I'll double click here. Right now my system understands Azure CLI. If I just install CLI, right, CLI went ahead and put a path to it. My system understands PowerShell. All these are here. I'll say new. I copied that path, I'm pasting it, and I'll put a forward slash. That's it. And I'll say okay. I'll say okay, and I'll say okay out here. That's it. So I've configured my system to understand terraforms. Once that's done, I'll just go here, open up a PowerShell probably in order to check whether Terraform is really installed or not. And I'll execute a command called terraform space version. And this is what in return it gives me, telling that Terraform version 1.3.4 is actually installed in your system. This is what you need to do in order to configure Terraform. I haven't used Terraforms. I just configured Terraform till here. So firstly, I installed Azure CLI. Now, sometimes guys, what can happen is that once you install Azure CLI and Terraforms, sometimes the installation might not be successful until unless you restart your systems. So my best practice or my suggestion is after you install both, please restart your systems. Please restart your system so that we can start using it out here as such. So I just restarted it. So I said remote desktop is done. So once you restart, you can start using this out here as such. Yes. Any questions still here on what we need to do? Again, first CLI, anything is okay. You can first download Terraforms and configure system and then install CLI. Any order is okay. But I prefer going with CLI first, then Terraforms, then configuring the system to understand Terraform, then a restart after all these things. And after the restart, I need a tool to start writing Terraforms. Editor. Just like we had earlier, I'll go for VS Code. Same thing. VS Code is a one-stop editor that I have. And inside VS Code, I'll search for an extension called Terraforms. And then when you type in Terraform, right, I'll tell you, okay, fine, you know what, there are multiple Terraforms extensions that are available. I'll prefer going for HashiCorp Terraform by a company called HashiCorp. The company that's written the Terraform is also giving you an extension for VS Code. Here, you just see an install button. In my case, I have an uninstall. This is my local system again. Go ahead, install this out. It will take less than 30 seconds or something. After this is done, go ahead to Azure Terraforms. Again, publisher Microsoft. And just go ahead and install this out too. Install this one too. So two extensions, and once this is done, you are good to go ahead and start your journey with Terraforms. So again, let's go back. So Azure CLI download Terraforms, configure the Terraform editor VS Code, and install the extensions. These are a couple of things that I do in order to go ahead and get started with something called Terraforms out here such. So yes, any questions till here that I can take, guys? Anyone? Any questions that I can take till here? Are we good till here, guys? Any questions or any confusions till here?
No, sir.
Okay, let's see my battery. Okay, fine. I'll just give me a second. I'll
Where this
just.
say Azure CLI will be used?
Azure CLI will be used to deploy your Terraforms. So, for example, template and directly go to the portal and deploy it like the way you are doing an ARM template. You cannot do
Okay,
that. You will need a command line in order to talk to Azure and then give that particular Terraform template to it. That's where Azure CLI will come into picture.
okay. Can't we configure PowerShell?
We can't because again, Terraforms is a multi-cloud tool, right? So it expects you to run Terraform on, let's say, any platform like a Windows or like a Linux. So you cannot directly use PowerShell for that. That's the reason you
Okay,
need an Azure CLI module for the same thing.
okay. So in the system variable, while we are applying configurations in the path, the slash is
Mhm.
required post path.
Again, I have configured it without the slash. It was working for me, but sometimes it cannot understand the path out here. So it's always the best practice to give a slash so that you can directly get your exe file.
Okay, all right. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, any more questions, guys?
So by using the Terraforms, we can create the infrastructure in the portal, Azure portal.
Uh, Sorry, can you come
Like
again, please?
we,
Your voice. Mhm.
by using the Terraforms, we can also create the infrastructure in the Azure portal itself. Azure
In
portal.
the Azure, you mean to say like
Like
the
we
way
do
we
by
used
using the, yeah, sir, by using the
ARM
ARM
template?
template, we use the
No, you cannot
custom
do that.
build template.
No, you cannot do that. Your Azure portal will only and only understand JSON. Your Azure portal will not understand the language of Terraforms. That's the reason you will have to convert that entire Terraform into a JSON, which you don't do it. We'll see how the operation really works out here. In the background, your Terraform templates entirely gets converted into JSON, and then it presents it to the Azure portal. That's the reason you will need all these downloads, all these installations that we're doing out here. But in short, no, you cannot take an entire Terraform template and give it to the Azure portal just like we did with an ARM because the language entirely is different. So we'll also see that. All right, so let's begin our journey with Terraforms, and we'll start with two simple resources. I will use a resource group and a storage account for my example. So I want to create a resource group and a storage account under it. These are the two resources that I want to build using a Terraform template. So I'll go here. Firstly, I'll open up a new folder. I'll say open a folder as a new folder. Let's say this is 7am Terraform class 1. Select this particular folder and I'll start writing firstly a file called main. This can be name, can be anything. Convention, the best practice, we call it as a main file. I'll say dot tf Terraform. As and when I type in dot .tf, the system is able to understand that you're writing something known as a Terraform language because you have installed some Terraform extensions out there and you have also configured Terraform in your system. So it's telling, okay, fine, you know what, I understand you want me to write it in something called Terraforms. I'm good with that. And it's telling, okay, fine, what do you want to write? The very first thing that you have to tell Terraforms is that Terraform is a multi-cloud platform tool, right? You have to tell Terraform on which cloud am I deploying? On which cloud is this particular Terraform needs to go into? For that, what I'll do is I'll come here. I'll say control plus space. As and when I do that, it will load multiple suggestions out here. I'm looking for a suggestion called provider. Now it's telling who is the cloud provider that you want to work on. I'll say Azure RM, Azure Resource Manager. Inside that, I'll just go ahead, put something called as a features block. It's nothing but inside this particular block called provider, I'm putting an empty block called features. We'll see why this is used, but for now we'll just put it as an empty block. So I'm telling provider, and again Terraform support commenting also. So I'll tell this is the provider configuration, and again I'm just using a hash to comment this out. So I put a hash, commented this out, and now if I want to create a resource group, again you can write everything from the scratch, or simply go down the easiest way, simply go down to something called just go here, type in Terraform Azure provider. Once you type this in, right, it's telling you docs overview Terraform for Microsoft. It's firstly telling you how do you use this provider. If you click on this, right, this is what it's doing. See provider, Azure RM, and then configuration options. I just copied this out, put an empty block here called features, and in the left hand side you get the entire documentation, how to create all these resources and all that stuff. So what I'll do is I'll search for something called as resource group. As and when I do that, I have something called your base resources resource group. I'll click on this, and it's telling you how do you create a resource group. This is the example usage. It's telling this is how you use it. I'll just copy this out, go back, paste this out. It's telling resource. It's starting with something called as resource, indicating that I want to create a resource whose type is identified by something called Azure RM underscore resource underscore group. This is your resource identifier on what resource that you want to give. Space, there is something called example. This is the local name of your resource group. The local name, meaning it's like a parameter. When you say in PowerShell, dollar name is equal to something, and you can use this dollar name anywhere in your script. Just like that, I am declaring something called as an alias name or a local name or a local name out here. This can be anything. Literally, this can be anything out here. For example, I'll say first RG because I'm creating a first research group, or you can simply say local RG name, or I can say simply RG. That's it. Anything, literally anything. This is not the name. Again, I repeat myself. This is not the name that we are creating on the Azure portal. This is for our convenience, meaning you want to call it something, you can go ahead and call it something out here like local RG or something like this. So a local name, just for you to go ahead and use this out. Inside this block, I have two properties called the name and the location of the resource that I want to create. This is your actual name that gets created. So I have a name. This is my actual resource group name. Here, what I'll do is I'll now call this particular resource group as Terraform RG first, something like this. And the location, let's say I want to create this resource group in a location called Central US. Done. My resource block is ready, and I'll just save this out. And okay, let me save this out. And I also want a storage account out here. But before I go to storage account, are there any questions in the resource block or in this particular resource group block that I can take? Is this simple to understand? Yes, no, maybe.
Yes,
Yes.
sir. Okay, sir. Yes,
Hmm? Now,
yes, sir. But
good,
sir,
please.
where we are using that RG local name?
I'll talk about that. So I'll talk about
Okay,
that when
okay,
I'm creating something like a storage account. So where we are
okay,
using that
okay.
is now I want to create a storage account inside it. So again, I'll go back to the Terraform portal. I'll say storage account, and there are a lot of resources for storages. So you'll have to be a little careful. Just scroll down. There is something called Azure RM underscore storage underscore account. And now it's telling you how do you create a storage account. Just scroll down. It's telling Firstly, you need a resource group to create. So I already have a resource group. Then it's telling please copy this entire block for storage account. I'll copy this out, come back, I'll paste this out. Say this is the storage account creation block. Now let's see. It's telling resource. Again, it's talking about a resource called Azure RM underscore storage underscore account. This was Azure RM underscore resource underscore group. Then you have an example. It's also asking you for a local name for the storage account. So what I'll do is I'll simply put, since for RG I said RG, for storage account I'll say STOR store. Can be anything again. Now the name of the storage account. Again, name of the storage account should be 3 to 24 characters. Should be unique, and it shouldn't have any special characters. So what I'll do is I'll put a name something like dev for development team, TF using Terraform. I'm saying STOR store storage account. I'll say this is a location called CUS Central US 000, something like this. So I'm saying dev TF store CUS 000. Now it's asking for the resource group name. You don't have to give the entire name out here. I can simply copy this, I can put the entire name out here, but I don't want to do that. What I can do is I can tell my Terraform template that you know what, there is a resource already called as resource group name out here with a local name called RG. Please take this and get a property called name. So what I'll do, I'll simply tell here that it is Azure RM. Type it. Do you see? It's telling Azure RM underscore resource underscore group dot RG. Is this what you are looking for? I'm saying yes. This is what I'm looking for. The local name is used here. So imagine you have multiple resource groups. You have one thing called RG1, but you want to create the storage account only under RG. This is where I'm calling that particular local name. I'm saying Azure RM underscore resource underscore group dot RG. Now go into that particular RG, this particular RG, and get its name. It's saying, okay, fine. What is the property? I see name and location are two properties. Can you give me what exactly is the property that you're looking for? I'll say dot. Here you have multiple properties like ID, location, and name. I'll say name. And it's turning into blue color, telling me that yes, I am able to see that there is a property called name and that results to a value called Terraform first RG. So I'll create it there. Again, the location, I want it to be in the same location where my resource group is. So I can say Azure RM underscore resource underscore group. Replace the example with your own name called RG. That's it. So it's now telling Azure RM underscore resource underscore group dot RG, which is this one, dot location, which is the location of that particular resource group. This is how I can refer back in my template. This is how I use my local names. Then you have account tier, standard or premium, account replication type, LRS, GRS, ZRS and all. I'll say LRS. And you can have multiple tag values out here. I'll say environment is development. I'll say owner, something like xyz@gmail.com and so on and so forth. Same thing. If you want to create a storage account, let's say in ARM template, there are a lot of things that you have to do. There is a parameter, there is a resource block, there is again inside the resource block you'll have to create a resource block in JSON, which is a little confusing for a human eye. You'll get a little confused while doing this and so on and so forth. So this is cleaner. It's much more simpler. It's like just go create your resources. You don't require a quotation, you don't require a comma, you don't require all these things. Just go ahead, have it clean, and it looks actually cleaner. See, the same storage account, if I go ahead and create it with an ARM, it's a little bit lengthier and it's a little bit difficult for me to, let's say, maintain and manage. So any questions still here? So firstly, I created the resource block. Before the resource, I declared what is my provider, and I'm calling this resource block out here when I'm creating the storage. So name, resource group name, location, account tier, account replication type, and then the tag value, all within these codes. Is any questions still here? Anyone? Any questions still here?
Sir, under storage account,
Okay.
Is this sorry? There is no required to mention the premium and sorry, sir. Already is there.
It's here.
Sorry, sir.
So it is account
Sorry, sir.
and underscore tier. So it's a mandatory parameter. So this is something that we have to mention out here. So it's already there.
Yes,
So
sir.
I just took this one. No worries. Is any more questions, guys?
The storage account name is in hard coded, so we can
So
change it
mhm.
to.
Yes, good question. Storage account name is hard coded. Can we do a variable? Can you do a parameter? Yes, we can do that. But firstly, let us see it in a hard coded form, and then we'll understand how to pass variables and all these things.
Okay.
Now, unlike ARM, right, you cannot take this entire template, go to your Azure portal, and say deploy a custom template. So where start deploy custom template? I cannot go here. I cannot build my own template here. Paste this, right? This is not a JSON language. Firstly, if I save this, it'll simply tell you know what I expect something called JSON, but I'm not getting JSON. So this is the issue. Whenever you do terraforms, this is what is the issue that comes into picture. You are writing a terraform file in a language called HCL. Now this is the language that I'm using to go ahead and write terraforms. Whereas when you want to create resources on the Azure portal, Azure expects you to create resources in the form of JSON. So even when you write a PowerShell script, right, the PowerShell script in the backend converts it entire self into or converts itself into JSON and then goes ahead into the Azure portal and let's say creates resources for you. Azure portal will only accept not only Azure, AWS, GCP, all these things will only accept JSON in order to create the infrastructure. It cannot use YAML. It cannot understand HCL. It cannot do that. That's the reason you will need to convert this entire HCL into a JSON and present it to Azure and say, okay, fine, you know what, I wrote it in HCL because it's easy for me to, let's say, write it in HCL. But in order for me to go ahead and deploy resources onto the Azure portal, I first need to convert this entire thing into JSON. And that is where Azure Terraform plugins come into picture. Plugins are nothing but pieces of software, exe files, very simple exe files that you can talk about. Azure knows that people are using terraforms. Azure knows that even if you look at the ARM template documentation, right? Earlier we just used to have ARM templates out here. So if you go here and go to something known as template references section, we only used to have, let's say, ARM templates out here. So if I say storage accounts, data lake, not this one, yes, accounts, linked accounts, storage, yes. If I go to storage accounts out here, for example, and if I just scroll down and look at my template references, this is the API version that they're talking about. No, not this one, references. So I'll just scroll down and go to storages. And if I go to storage accounts out here, earlier I only used to get ARM template. Now they're also giving me an example on how to write it in Terraforms. Saying how do you entirely write this in Terraform? Now what do you need to write it in Terraform and so on and so forth. And then you have Azure Bicep, of course, which is the latest language that Microsoft is developing at their end. So what it is telling you, or what Microsoft tells, is that Microsoft knows that people are writing all these things in Terraform. So Microsoft knows that okay, people who are writing in Terraform may not be aware of JSON. I cannot ask them to convert JSON. So I will go ahead and supply them some softwares that they will have to download before they go ahead and execute the Terraform, or before they go ahead and, let's say, execute this particular Terraform templates. And these softwares are called Azure plugins. Or you can also say this is an Azure backend, which will help you just convert the entire HCL into, let's say, a JSON language. Now, how do I download it? Very simple. Either use VS Code to run a script, or you can use PowerShell ISE, whichever is okay. Go to the folder in which you have written your main file. Very importantly, I'm talking about the main file. So this is my folder. So what I'll do is I'll say copy path. I'll say cd. I'm going to a PowerShell. You can use PowerShell ISE, you can use VS Code, anything is okay. I'll say enter. So I'm inside this particular folder, and in this folder, if I say list, I have, let's say, a main.tf file. This is the only file that I do have. Good enough. Now I'll start writing a command, a very simple command called terraform space init init, meaning terraform initialize. As and when I give this command, right, this particular call that you have here will go into the Azure portal, or will go into, let's say, the Azure provider, because Terraform now knows that your provider is Azure RM. So it will say, okay, fine, let me go request for Azure, give a request to Azure, and Azure in return will give Terraform the required software, or will give you the required software that will help later in order to convert your entire Terraform template into a JSON language. This is called Terraform init, short form for Terraform initialization, the very first command that you have to start with. And if I say enter, this is what it's telling me. It's saying initializing the backend, in installing the provider plugins, finding the latest for HashiCorp. So it's telling Azure RM, yes, this is what your cloud provider is. So I'll just request for the cloud provider. And in the background, if you see, along with the Terraform main file, I'm having this particular .terraform folder that's getting downloaded. We'll also see that. And in a minute or so, you should be able to see a green color success message telling that, you know what, Terraform init is done, and the Azure and let's say the Azure backend is initialized successfully. So let's give it a second. Again, I have seen sometimes the Azure PowerShell, whenever you write the code in Azure PowerShell out here from your local machine, and you try to install Terraforms, it takes some time. And if you see, then Terraform has successfully been initialized. It's telling initialize is done. And in this particular directory, Terraform has downloaded all these things. So if you go into the directory physically and check this out, so let me do that. Not this one, sorry. It's Terraform providers, and inside providers you have multiple folders inside which you have something known as an exe file. This exe file that is there in the background will help you convert, or will help you rather, let's say, do a conversion of the entire HCL into a JSON structure and then present it to Azure. This is the very first command that you have to start writing. The second command for Terraform, I'll just say cls clear screen. And before I'm writing the second command, something that I have to do is that I have to log in into the Azure portal, because in order to apply, in order to, let's say, go ahead and run any other Terraform, in order to create the infrastructure, I need to establish a connection between my Terraforms and a Azure portal by using CLI commands. So when we use PowerShell, we said connect-az account. For CLI, I'll say it is az space login. So it's Azure CLI. So az space login. I'll say enter, and it'll open a browser for me. I have already signed in, so I'll say sign in here. And once I do that, it will say, okay, fine, the login is done. It will take like a minute for the login to be done. And it will give you all these things, telling that, okay, fine, you are a part of multiple tenants. Like I, as a user, right? I'm a user who's a part of multiple tenants out here. That's the reason it's telling me, you know what, please tell me what is the subscription you want to run the commands in. Not to tell that, I'll say az space account space set hyphen subscription, and the name or the ID of the subscription. In my case, the name here is Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. So I'll just copy this out. I'll paste it and I'll say enter. I'm setting the Azure context in which I need to run my commands. And once this is done, I will now start writing a command called terraform space plan. I don't apply terraforms directly. There are three steps in which I need to, let's say, go ahead and take terraforms out here. The very first, terraform init, initializing the backend. Second is terraform plan. Third is terraform apply. So initialization, planning, and applying application. These are the three phases of terraform. So terraform init. After init, you go ahead and do something called terraform plan. In the terraform plan, it will just give you an idea on what Terraform will do. It's like a dry run. It'll just tell you, if you do this plan, what is Terraform going to really going to really do out here for you. And then finally, you'll have Terraform apply, create the actual resources. So init will be the first step, plan is going to be the second, apply will create your resources. Planning will just tell you on whether Terraform will delete resources, or whether it will create resources, or whether it will modify your resources. What will it really do is what plan will tell. So I'll say Terraform plan, I'll say enter. Will take some time to go ahead and, let's say, go into the Azure portal, understand what are all the resources there. So it will, firstly, what Terraform plan will do is that it's going to go into the Azure portal, and it's going to see whether you have a resource group with the name called Terraform RG. It says no, okay, fine. So I'll have to create a resource group. And if I'm creating the resource group, Terraform plan will also tell, okay, fine, what are the properties of this particular resource group? Where should I create this out in? And after that, Terraform will tell, okay, fine, I created the resource group successfully. Do I see a storage account with this particular name? If I don't, then it'll understand the properties like, okay, fine, what is the name of the storage account? What is the resource group under which I need to create it? What is the location under which I need to create it? What is the application, or what is the storage account tier? Is it standard? Is it premium? What kind of a replication that I need to create on these things out? Now, if you see, Terraform plan has run. So I give a command called Terraform plan. It's telling Terraform, it's used to select this one. It's telling Terraform will do a creation of a resource group. The first thing Terraform is telling, okay, fine, you know what, I'll create a resource group. The ID of the resource group, I don't know. I will tell you after I apply it, meaning after you are done with that, I'll give you the ID. Then I have something called the name. It's telling, okay, fine, this is the name I'll create this in. And then you have the Azure storage account with all the, let's say, child properties under it. Like, what is the storage account, let's say, connection string, SAS tokens, all these things out. So for example, access keys, it's a sensitive value, so I won't expose this out. It's telling endpoint. I'll tell you known after apply. What is the name of the storage account? Yes, I know before I apply it out. Then it's telling the location is Central US, because your resource group is also in Central US, and also it's telling what is your resource group, Terraform RG, I mean Terraform first RG or Terraform RG first, and all these things. But this step, and if you just scroll down, it's telling you plan will do. It'll say 2 to add, 0 to change, 0 to destroy. So 2 to add here is means nothing but a resource group and a storage account inside that particular resource group is what Terraform is now doing. But it's telling, you know what, I just planned it. So if you refresh it any number of times, the plan will not really go ahead and create resources for you. So that's the reason you'll have to run something called Terraform space apply. As and when I do the apply, Terraform will now start taking your templates, converting it into JSON in the background, sending it to the Azure portal, and then it will start application of, let's say, your templates out here as such. So it will take like a minute or so, and after a minute, it'll again tell you, okay, fine, you know what, see, if you see, it's telling there are 2 to add. Are you sure? Do you want to apply this out? I'll say yes, apply. I'll say enter. As and when I do this, Terraform will now start taking each and every individual resource. Again, Terraform also knows which resource to create first. How is the resource dependency? Because you cannot create a storage account first and then create a resource group. You'll have to first create a resource group, and only then you can create a storage account under it. Terraform knows this dependencies. So that's the reason it's saying, you know what, I'm creating a storage account. Creation completed after 4 seconds. Now it's going ahead with something known as, or resource group, sorry, creation of the resource group firstly that got completed in 4 seconds. It's also giving you the ID of your resource group. After that, it's saying, okay, fine, I will now go ahead and create something called as a storage account in the Azure portal, which means that it's Azure RM storage, something is creating that. And if I go back into the Azure portal right now, I have a Terraform first RG inside which I don't have any resources right now because the application is still going on. The storage account will take some time. It will take like about 2 or 3 minutes to get created. So it's saying, okay, fine, I'm still creating and so on and so forth. So let's give it a second. And after that, if you see, it took about 38 seconds for the storage account to be created. And it is telling 2 resources have been successfully added. Application is complete. 0 changed, 0 destroyed. So if you go back, and refresh the screen, I should have a storage account that is created in standard tier with two different tags, LRS, storage v2, central US, and all these things. So this is how Terraform really works. Three very important steps of Terraform: init to download all the plugins, plan to tell you what exactly Terraform will do, apply to actually go ahead and let's say perform your resource creation out here as such. This is the three steps of Terraform, and we will have to do these three steps every time when you go ahead and let's say work with Terraforms out here as such. Yes, any questions till here on how did the resource creation actually happen in Terraform? Anyone, any questions that I can take? Anyone, any questions that I can take here?
So this is everything is happening in the background only through plugins. We can't see the
Correct.
JSON.
Good question. You can't see the JSON. Not completely true. You can see the JSON.
Okay.
If you click on this, do you see there's a JSON file that got produced, which is called as a Terraform state file? This is the heart
Oh,
and soul of Terraform. Central piece. It's called as a state file.
so it will be rewind every all the time. It
It
will.
should.
Is it-
It should remain. It should be protected. Very important file. It will remain all the time. You are not supposed to edit it. You as a user
oh,
are not supposed to edit it. This is completely managed by Terraform. Now, if we are editing it, then our Terraform application might go into a misconfiguration out here. So it's Terraform with a .tf state. Extension is not JSON, it's a .tf state. So if you go here,
okay.
Terraform is now telling, okay, fine, these are all the resources that I created. And I'm storing it in the form of JSON. So it's telling version, Terraform version, resources. And there are two resources Terraform is now telling that I created. Two JSON objects that Terraform is now telling is that firstly, it is Azure RM resource group with a local name called RG with an actual name called Terraform RG first. And then it's telling again managed resource, managed by whom? Terraform again. Who's the provider? Terraform Azure, let's say Azure RM. It's telling Azure RM underscore storage underscore account with a local name called store. And just scroll down, it's telling you what is the actual name, what is let's say the ID and all these things. This is called as a Terraform state file. Where is it used? We'll look at that. Why is it used? We'll look at that. But this is a very, very important file for Terraform out here as such.
Okay. This will be get created before apply.
No, after apply.
After
It'll
apply
get
only.
created after application. Because if
Okay.
you see before apply, Terraform doesn't know what is your ID, right?
Okay.
Terraform will only know your ID after the application. So this is an
Yeah.
after application file that Terraform produces. And I'll also tell you why exactly Terraform uses this file, where exactly Terraform really uses this file out here as such.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Is there more questions, guys?
So that means every time while writing the AR, sorry, Terraform template, we
Mhm.
have to execute these steps, right? So initialization, sorry, and plan and apply, right? In
Init
order
is
to
a
convert
one-time
it to.
command. Yes, init is a one-time command just to download all these things out. So once you
Okay.
have
This
this right,
plugin we
you
can
don't
use.
have to do. Hmm? Okay,
Okay.
please.
Okay. This plugin we can use it for another template also, right? So Terraform template.
You can, but it is not
Mm,
recommended. It is not
mm,
recommended to do that because this plugin, right? It keeps
mm.
updating itself on a regular basis. So every time you write a new template, and when you do not have a plugin, it's recommended that you go ahead and do a Terraform init for the very first time. Again, if you go ahead and let's say add multiple resources, let's say tomorrow I go ahead and add a storage account too, and I again want to perform these steps, that is when I don't need to go ahead and do a Terraform init because I already have my plugin. So I'll just go ahead and do a Terraform plan and apply. So this init step, right? It's first time for a main file. If you don't have that particular Terraform plugin in the folder, run this init. Even if you run the next time, nothing is going to happen. It's just going to go ahead and say, okay, fine, the plugins are already there, so I'll move forward. That's it. So nothing to worry, but it's a recommended practice to run Terraform init for the very first time when you're doing the plan and apply in a particular folder. In that particular folder, if you don't have that particular exe file, it's recommended to let's say do a Terraform init. Does it answer your question?
Yes, yes. If you want to the template in another folder, that means there also we have there
You have
again
to
we
run
have
a
to run this.
yes, exactly. You have to run a
Okay,
Terraform init for the very first time. Every time
okay,
when you do a Terraform, you have to do a Terraform plan and apply. Plan and apply are compulsory. The init is optional.
okay, okay. Sir, thank
Yes, any more questions, guys?
The file log.hcl is a by default file.
It's a version log. Yes, it's a default file. This is something that Terraform will handle it.
Okay.
Yes, any more questions, guys? All right, so that's it from mine today. Just try this out, and before you come to tomorrow's class, just read what is a Terraform state file. That's it. What is Terraform state file is something that I want you all to read. And in tomorrow's session, we'll take a look at what is Terraform state file, and we'll do multiple operations on Terraform by introducing something like variables and all these things. Okay, thanks, guys, and have a good day ahead. Thank you.